I'll never forget the night I saw Vincent Moretti, the Viper, lose his composure. Not in a back alley brawl, not during a tense sit-down with rival families, but in the opulent, hushed lobby of Sterling and Sons Textiles. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and fear, a palpable tension that clung to the velvet drapes and polished marble. He stood there, a silhouette against the city lights filtering through the grand windows, his tailored suit impeccable, his eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burning with an inferno I'd never witnessed. The words that had just been uttered, sharp and cruel, hung in the silence, echoing the injustice. A woman, small and frail, her face etched with a lifetime of hardship, stood trembling, her dignity stripped bare. And then, Vincent moved. It wasn't a sudden, violent outburst, but a slow, deliberate turn, like a predator sensing its prey. The man responsible, Mr. Sterling, a pillar of society by day, a petty tyrant by night, suddenly looked very small, very vulnerable. He had made a grave mistake, a transgression against an unwritten code, and in that moment, everyone present knew, with chilling certainty, that the consequences would be swift and absolute. The city held its breath, waiting for the Viper to strike, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the distant wail of a siren, a stark reminder of the world outside this gilded cage of power and retribution. What unfolded next would become a legend whispered in the shadowed corners of Little Italy for decades. Good evening, my dear listeners. Tonight, I want to transport you back to a time when New York City pulsed with a different kind of energy, a raw, untamed spirit that defined an era. The year was 1958, October 17th to be precise. The place? Little Italy, a vibrant tapestry of tradition, ambition, and unspoken rules, where honor was currency and respect was earned, often with a heavy price. In this world, a young man named Vincent Moretti, just 32 years old, had carved out a formidable reputation. They called him the Viper, not for his venom, but for his swift, decisive strikes and his uncanny ability to anticipate every move. He was a man of striking appearance, dark, slicked-back hair, eyes that held both charm and menace, and a physique honed by years of navigating the city's treacherous underbelly. His suits, always custom-made, draped perfectly over his broad shoulders, often revealing glimpses of intricate, old-world tattoos snaking up his forearms, symbols of loyalty and lineage. Vincent was a man of power, a man of influence, and a man who lived by a code as ancient as the cobblestones of Mulberry Street. Our story, however, doesn't begin with Vincent, but with Elena Rossi, a woman whose life was a testament to quiet resilience. Elena was a cleaning lady, a faxinera, as they'd say in the old country, her hands calloused from years of scrubbing floors and polishing brass. She was in her late 50s, her face a roadmap of wrinkles earned through hard work and worry, but her eyes still held a spark of dignity, a quiet strength that belied her humble profession. She worked for Mr. Sterling, the owner of Sterling and Sons Textiles, a man whose wealth was as vast as his ego. Sterling was a portly man in his late 40s, with a perpetually sneering expression and a penchant for making those beneath him feel even smaller. He reveled in his power, using it as a weapon to belittle and demean, particularly those he deemed insignificant. The stage was set, the players in place for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of their world. The conflict was simple: a man who believed his money bought him the right to disrespect anyone, and a woman whose quiet dignity was her only shield. Vincent, unknowingly, was about to become the unexpected arbiter of justice. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The late 1950s in New York was a spectacle of contrasts. The city hummed with the promise of a new decade, yet clung to the traditions of the past. Men wore fedoras and sharp suits. Women donned elegant dresses with cinched waists and full skirts, their hair perfectly coiffed. The streets of Little Italy were a symphony of Italian dialects, the aroma of garlic and simmering tomato sauce wafting from bustling trattorias, mingling with the exhaust fumes of gleaming Cadillacs and Lincolns. These were the cars of choice for men like Vincent, symbols of their status and power, their chrome glinting under the streetlights. Neon signs flickered to life as dusk settled, casting a warm glow on storefronts and the faces of passers-by. Inside Sterling and Sons Textiles, the atmosphere was different. It was a world of hushed opulence, where the rustle of silk and the clinking of crystal glasses were the loudest sounds. Mr. Sterling's office, in particular, was a shrine to his self-importance. Dark mahogany, leather-bound books, and a heavy oak desk adorned with a silver cigar box and a crystal decanter of amber whiskey. Elena, in her worn but meticulously clean uniform, moved through this world like a ghost, her presence barely acknowledged by the well-heeled clientele and the arrogant staff. She was a fixture, a part of the background, invisible to those who saw only her function, not her humanity. Her days were long, starting before dawn and ending long after most had gone home. She earned a meager wage, perhaps $40 a week, barely enough to cover rent and food, but she worked with an unwavering dedication, a silent testament to her pride. The tension in the air that evening wasn't just the usual hum of a busy establishment, it was something more, a subtle undercurrent of unease. Vincent Moretti was expected. His family had a long-standing, if unofficial, business relationship with Sterling & Sons, a relationship that ensured smooth operations and protection for the textile empire. Vincent was there for a routine meeting, a discussion about logistics and security, code words for the delicate balance of power that governed the city. He arrived in a sleek black 1957 Cadillac Eldorado, its fins gleaming, a silent statement of his arrival. As he stepped out, flanked by two imposing figures, the street seemed to quiet, a collective acknowledgement of his presence. He exuded an aura of controlled power, a man who commanded respect without uttering a single threat. The stage was set, not for a simple business meeting, but for an unforeseen collision of worlds, where the quiet dignity of a working woman would inadvertently ignite the fury of a man who lived by a code of honor, a code that Mr. Sterling was about to violate in the most egregious way. The meeting with Mr. Sterling had just concluded, the air still thick with the scent of Vincent's expensive Cuban cigar and Sterling's cheap domestic brand. Vincent, ever the picture of calm, had been discussing the latest contributions to the family's welfare fund, a euphemism for protection money. As he rose to leave, a slight commotion near the main entrance caught his attention. Elena, her cleaning cart laden with buckets and brushes, was attempting to navigate past a group of boisterous, well-dressed men, Sterling's associates, who were blocking her path. She murmured an apology, trying to squeeze by, but one of the men, emboldened by a few too many whiskeys, deliberately bumped her cart, sending a bucket of soapy water sloshing onto the pristine marble floor. Elena gasped, her face flushing with embarrassment and fear. Mr. Sterling, who had followed Vincent out, saw the incident, and, instead of offering an apology or assistance, seized the opportunity to assert his perceived superiority. "Rossi, you clumsy old fool!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the grand lobby. "Look what you've done! This marble is imported, you imbecile! Do you know how much it costs to clean up your messes? You're a disgrace! You're lucky I even keep you around, you old hag!" His words were like daggers, each one aimed to wound, to diminish. Elena flinched, her shoulders slumping, her eyes downcast. She began to stammer an apology, her voice barely a whisper. I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling. It was an accident. I will clean it immediately." As she fumbled for a rag, her hands trembling, Vincent, who had been observing the scene with a detached interest that quickly morphed into something colder, took a slow drag from his cigar. His eyes, usually unreadable, now held a glint of steel. He watched as Sterling continued his tirade, oblivious to the silent, dangerous presence just a few feet away. "An accident? You call this an accident? You're a liability, Rossi. A burden. You're lucky to have this job, you ungrateful wretch. Perhaps it's time we found someone younger, someone who isn't a complete waste of space." Sterling's voice grew louder, more venomous, his face contorted in a sneer. He even took a step closer to Elena, his finger jabbing in her direction, as if to physically underscore his contempt. The other men chuckled, enjoying the spectacle of their boss humiliating a defenseless woman. Elena, her face now pale, looked as though she might collapse. Her dignity, her quiet strength, was being systematically dismantled in front of strangers. It was a moment that etched itself into the memory of everyone present, a stark tableau of cruelty and quiet suffering, and it was about to ignite a firestorm. A hush fell over the lobby, a sudden unnatural silence that replaced the snickers and the booming voice of Mr. Sterling. Vincent Moretti, the Viper, had extinguished his cigar with a deliberate, almost ritualistic motion, crushing it into a nearby ashtray. His movements were slow, controlled, yet they radiated an intensity that made the very air vibrate. He hadn't said a word, hadn't raised his voice, but his presence alone was enough to freeze the blood in the veins of Sterling's associates. Sterling himself, still flushed with the adrenaline of his petty tyranny, finally noticed the shift in atmosphere. He turned, a self-satisfied smirk still playing on his lips, only to find himself face to face with Vincent. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of apprehension. Vincent's eyes, usually a deep, calm brown, were now like chips of obsidian, cold and unyielding. He didn't speak to Sterling directly at first. Instead, he looked at Elena, who was still hunched over, trying to wipe the spilled water, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the rag. A flicker of something akin to compassion, quickly masked, crossed Vincent's face. Then, his gaze returned to Sterling, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mr. Sterling. Vincent's voice was low, a dangerous rumble that barely carried, yet it commanded absolute attention. It seems you have a problem with your employee. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of an unspoken threat. Sterling, attempting to regain his composure, puffed out his chest. It's nothing, Vincent. Just a clumsy old woman. She needs to learn her place. He tried to wave it off, to dismiss Elena and the incident as trivial. But Vincent wasn't having it. He took a single, measured step closer to Sterling, invading his personal space. The two imposing figures who accompanied Vincent shifted almost imperceptibly, their hands subtly moving closer to their jackets. The message was clear. This was no longer a minor workplace incident. This was personal. This was about respect, about honor, about the unwritten laws that governed their world. Vincent's family, his organization, had a strict code. Women, especially older women, were to be treated with deference, with respect. To humiliate one, particularly in public, was an affront not just to the individual, but to the very fabric of their community, their values. It was a challenge to the established order, a blatant disregard for the unspoken rules that kept the peace and kept men like Vincent in power. Sterling had not just insulted Elena, he had, in Vincent's eyes, insulted the very concept of dignity, a concept Vincent understood intimately, despite his profession. The stakes had just been raised exponentially, from a spilled bucket of water to a matter of profound consequence. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button. It helps me bring more stories like this to you. The air in the lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Sterling, despite his bluster, was beginning to sweat under Vincent's unwavering gaze. He tried to laugh, a nervous, hollow sound. Come on, Vincent. It's just a maid. What's the big deal? He gestured dismissively towards Elena, who had frozen, her eyes wide with terror, caught between the two powerful men. Vincent's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly. The big deal, Mr. Sterling, Vincent said, his voice still dangerously calm, is respect, something you clearly know nothing about. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with implication. This woman, Elena, she works hard. She earns her living honestly, and she deserves to be treated with dignity, not like a dog. Sterling's face flushed crimson, a mixture of anger and fear. He was not used to being challenged, especially not in his own establishment, and certainly not over a mere cleaning lady. Dignity? She's a servant. Her dignity is tied to her ability to clean without making a mess, he retorted, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to assert his authority. It was a fatal miscalculation. Vincent took another step, closing the distance entirely. He was now standing directly in front of Sterling, his eyes boring into the textile magnates. The height difference, the sheer physical presence of Vincent, was intimidating. Every person has dignity, Mr. Sterling. Every single one. And to strip someone of it, especially someone who cannot fight back, that is the mark of a coward, not a man of power. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena, still clutching her rag, watched with bated breath. The other associates of Sterling had backed away, their faces pale, understanding the gravity of the situation. They knew Vincent's reputation, knew the stories whispered about the Viper's swift justice. This wasn't just about a spilled bucket. It was about a fundamental breach of conduct, a challenge to the very moral fabric that, ironically, even the mob upheld in its own twisted way. Vincent reached into his inner jacket pocket, not for a weapon, but for his wallet. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill, a significant sum in 1958, equivalent to over $1,000 today, and held it out to Elena. Elena, he said, his voice softening slightly as he addressed her directly. Please accept this for your trouble, and for your dignity. Elena hesitated, her eyes darting from the money to Vincent's face, then to Sterling's. She was torn between her fear of Sterling and the unexpected, almost overwhelming kindness from this formidable man. Sterling, meanwhile, was sputtering, "Vincent, what are you doing? You can't just give her money, this is my employee." But Vincent ignored him, his gaze fixed on Elena. It was a moment of profound vulnerability for all three, a decision point that would define their futures. Elena, with a trembling hand, slowly reached out and took the bill, her eyes welling up with tears of gratitude and relief. The confrontation had reached its peak, and the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. As Elena clutched the $100 bill, her tears a silent testament to the unexpected kindness, Vincent turned his full attention back to Mr. Sterling. The air crackled with an unspoken threat, far more potent than any shouted insult. Sterling, now visibly trembling, tried to stammer an apology. "Vincent, I didn't mean—" But Vincent cut him off with a raised hand, his expression unyielding. "You meant exactly what you said, Mr. Sterling, and that is the problem." Vincent then did something that sent a chill down everyone's spine. He reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box, no bigger than a deck of cards. He opened it, revealing a single, perfectly rolled Cuban cigar. He lit it slowly, deliberately, the flame briefly illuminating the intricate tattoos on his hand. The scent of rich tobacco filled the air, a stark contrast to the stale fear that permeated the room. "You see, Mr. Sterling," Vincent began, his voice a low, dangerous purr, "in our world, there are rules. Unwritten rules, perhaps, but rules nonetheless. And one of those rules is that you do not disrespect the innocent. You do not humiliate those who cannot defend themselves, especially not a woman who works hard, who asks for nothing but to be left in peace." He took a long drag from his cigar, exhaling a plume of smoke that seemed to coil around Sterling like a serpent. "You think your money makes you untouchable. You think your position gives you the right to treat people like dirt, but you are mistaken." Then came the shocking revelation, the twist that would forever alter the dynamic between them. Vincent leaned in close to Sterling, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Sterling and Elena, who was still nearby, could hear. "Elena Rossi," Vincent said, his eyes never leaving Sterling's, "is my aunt, my mother's sister. She came to this country with nothing, worked her fingers to the bone and never asked for a handout. She chose to clean your floors, Mr. Sterling, because she has pride, and you dared to spit on that pride." The color drained from Sterling's face, leaving him ashen. His eyes darted to Elena, then back to Vincent, a look of dawning horror spreading across his features. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just insulted a cleaning lady, he had publicly humiliated the aunt of Vincent the Viper Moretti, a man whose code of honor was absolute, and whose vengeance was legendary. The stakes had not just been raised, they had exploded. The room seemed to spin for Sterling, the opulent surroundings suddenly feeling like the walls of a cage. The unexpected justice was swift, not in a violent outburst, but in the chilling revelation of a familial connection, a bond that Sterling had unknowingly desecrated. The emotions in the room were at their peak. Elena's shock and quiet triumph, Sterling's abject terror, and Vincent's cold, righteous fury. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been utterly inverted, and Sterling knew, with a sickening certainty, that his world was about to come crashing down. The revelation hung in the air, a thunderclap in the hushed lobby. Mr. Sterling, his face a mask of pure terror, could only stammer, Your aunt? I had no idea." His voice was barely a squeak, all his bluster evaporated. Vincent, however, was far from finished. He took another slow drag from his cigar, his gaze never leaving Sterling's petrified face. "No, you had no idea," Vincent confirmed, his voice laced with a chilling calm. "Because you never bothered to see her as anything more than a uniform. You never bothered to see her as a human being, let alone a woman with family, with a history, with dignity." He then turned to his two imposing associates. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice now carrying a distinct edge of command, "Mr. Sterling here has just demonstrated a profound lack of respect, not just for my aunt, but for the very principles we uphold in this community. Such disrespect cannot go unaddressed." The two men nodded, their faces grim, their hands already moving with purpose. Sterling's eyes widened in panic. "Vincent, please, I beg you, I'll apologize. I'll give her a raise. Anything," he pleaded, his voice cracking. He knew the consequences of offending a man like Vincent. It wasn't just about a beating, it was about losing everything. Vincent merely smiled, a cold, humorless baring of teeth. "An apology now, Mr. Sterling, is too little, too late. The damage is done. The disrespect was public, and the lesson must be public too." He took a final deep puff from his cigar, then flicked the ash onto the pristine marble floor, directly at Sterling's expensive shoes. "From this moment forward, Sterling & Sons Textiles will no longer be under our protection, and every business in Little Italy, every supplier, every customer who values their own well-being will know exactly why." And this was the ultimate punishment in their world, not physical violence, but economic annihilation. Without the protection of Vincent's family, Sterling's business would be vulnerable to every petty thief, every rival, every unforeseen complication. His empire, built on arrogance, would crumble. Elena, watching the scene unfold, felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, yes, but also a profound sense of vindication. This powerful man, her nephew, had stood up for her, had avenged her humiliation in a way she could never have imagined. Sterling, now a pathetic figure, was being led away by Vincent's men, his protests fading into desperate whimpers. The resolution was clear. Sterling's reign of petty cruelty was over. His actions had consequences, swift and absolute, delivered by a man who valued honor above all else. The incident became a cautionary tale, whispered in the back rooms of Little Italy, a stark reminder that even the most powerful could fall if they forgot the fundamental code of respect. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I post new Mafia stories 3 times a week. The memory of that night, October 17, 1958, still sends shivers down my spine. It wasn't just a story of mob justice. It was a profound lesson in humanity, in the true meaning of power and respect. Vincent the Viper Moretti, a man often feared, showed a side of himself that night that few ever witnessed. A fierce loyalty to family, a deep-seated belief in dignity for all, regardless of their station. He wasn't just protecting his aunt. He was upholding a code, a moral compass that, however paradoxical it might seem coming from a mob boss, was undeniably present. Elena Rossi, the quiet cleaning lady, became an unwitting symbol of resilience, her humiliation transformed into a moment of unexpected triumph, a testament to the idea that even the smallest among us deserve to be treated with honor. Mr. Sterling, on the other hand, became a ghost in the city, his business collapsing within months, a stark reminder of the price of arrogance and cruelty. His regret, I'm told, was immediate and profound, but it came far too late. The legacy of that night wasn't just about a mob boss's fury, it was about the quiet strength of a woman, the unyielding code of a family, and the enduring truth that true power lies not in belittling others, but in upholding their dignity. It was a story that echoed through the streets of Little Italy, a legend passed down through generations, reminding everyone that even in the shadows, honor could find its way to shine. What did you think of Vincent's choice? Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories from the golden age of organized crime, check out the video I'm recommending next. I'll see you there.